Marcus Wellington had spent 15 years protecting members of the British royal family. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches with the discipline of a military officer, he commanded respect wherever he went. His pristine record included assignments with Prince William during official visits and security details for Princess Anne's charity events across Europe. Everything changed during a state dinner at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. Vice President J.D. Vance was attending as the senior American representative, while Marcus was assigned to coordinate security between the British and American teams. The evening started smoothly with diplomatic conversations and formal protocols being followed to the letter. Marcus noticed something troubling during the cocktail hour. Vice President Vance seemed agitated after a private phone call and began making increasingly inappropriate comments to the embassy staff. When a young British diplomat tried to redirect the conversation, Vance's tone became hostile and dismissive. The situation escalated when Vance approached Lady Catherine Morrison, a respected member of the British cultural delegation. Marcus watched from his security position as the vice president made what appeared to be unwelcome advances, placing his hand on Lady Morrison's shoulder despite her obvious discomfort. As head of security, Marcus had a duty to protect all guests at the embassy. He approached the pair diplomatically, suggesting that the vice president might want to rejoin the main reception. Instead of backing down, Vance turned his attention to Marcus, questioning his authority and making derogatory comments about British security protocols. The confrontation drew attention from other guests, including several journalists and embassy officials. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but Vance's behavior became increasingly erratic. The vice president accused Marcus of overstepping his bounds and threatened to have him removed from his position through diplomatic channels. What happened next would change Marcus's life forever. As he attempted to de-escalate the situation by moving Lady Morrison to safety, Vice President Vance grabbed Marcus by the arm and shoved him backward. The action was witnessed by multiple guests, including the British ambassador and 2 American security personnel. Marcus's training kicked in as he steadied himself and calmly asked the vice president to step back. Instead, Vance launched into a tirade that included personal attacks on Marcus's background and professional capabilities. The outburst was recorded on several phones by guests who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The embassy staff quickly intervened to separate the 2 men, but the damage was done. Videos of the incident began circulating on social media within hours, showing Vice President Vance in a clearly compromising position. Marcus found himself at the center of an international incident that would have far-reaching consequences. By the next morning, major news outlets were running stories about the confrontation. Marcus received calls from his superiors demanding a full report of the incident. Meanwhile, the vice president's office released a statement claiming that Marcus had been insubordinate and had misunderstood American diplomatic protocols. The official response from Vance's team only made things worse for Marcus. They suggested that he had fabricated the incident and questioned his mental stability. These accusations not only threatened his current position, but also jeopardized his entire career in security and protection services. Marcus realized he was facing a coordinated campaign to discredit him and protect the vice president's reputation. Phone calls from his contacts in law enforcement confirmed that pressure was being applied from high levels of the American government to minimize the incident and shift blame to the British security officer, friends and colleagues who had witnessed. Marcus's impeccable behavior over 15 years began reaching out with support and offers to testify on his behalf. Lady Morrison herself provided a detailed account of Vance's inappropriate behavior, corroborating Marcus's version of events. The breaking point came when Marcus discovered that false information about his background was being leaked to American media outlets. Stories appeared claiming he had previous disciplinary issues and suggesting he had a history of confrontational behavior with diplomatic guests. These lies threatened not only his reputation but also his ability to provide for his family. His wife, Sarah, and their 2 children were subjected to media attention and online harassment as the story gained traction. Marcus knew he had to take action to protect both his family and his professional integrity. After consulting with legal experts and reviewing the evidence, including video footage and witness statements, Marcus made a decision that would shock the political establishment. He would not allow himself to be made a scapegoat for the vice president's inappropriate behavior. The stage was set for a legal battle that would expose the inner workings of diplomatic security and test the limits of political accountability. Marcus had spent his career protecting others, but now he would have to fight to protect himself and his family from one of the most powerful men in America. Marcus Wellington walked into the law offices of Henderson, Burke & Associates with a folder containing evidence that would make international headlines. The prestigious firm had handled diplomatic disputes before, but nothing quite like this. Senior partner Rebecca Henderson reviewed the materials with growing concern and fascination. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witness statements from embassy guests described Vice President Vance's inappropriate behavior in detail. Security camera footage from the embassy showed the physical confrontation, clearly displaying Vance pushing Marcus without provocation. Most damaging were the audio recordings captured by guests' phones, preserving Vance's hostile words and personal attacks. Rebecca Henderson had built her reputation representing clients against powerful political figures. She recognized the significance of the case immediately. This wasn't just about one security officer's reputation, but about accountability for those in the highest levels of government. She agreed to represent Marcus on a contingency basis, understanding the financial challenges he faced. The legal team began building a comprehensive case that went beyond the embassy incident. They discovered a pattern of similar behavior from Vice President Vance dating back several years. Staff members from various events came forward with stories of inappropriate conduct, verbal abuse, and attempts to intimidate security personnel. Marcus learned that his case was stronger than he initially realized. The British government had conducted its own internal investigation and concluded that he had acted appropriately throughout the incident. His supervisors provided glowing character references and confirmed that his version of events matched their findings completely. Meanwhile, the vice president's legal team was mounting an aggressive defense. They hired one of Washington's most expensive law firms and began a campaign to portray Marcus as an attention-seeking foreign agent trying to embarrass the American government. Private investigators were dispatched to dig up dirt on Marcus's personal and professional life. The intimidation tactics extended to Marcus's family. Sarah Wellington received anonymous phone calls warning her to convince her husband to drop the case. Their children faced harassment at school from classmates whose parents had been influenced by the negative media coverage orchestrated by Vance's supporters. Despite the pressure, Marcus found unexpected allies. Other security professionals who had worked diplomatic events began sharing their own experiences with Vice President Vance's behavior. A former Secret Service agent provided testimony about having to intervene in similar situations involving the vice president and foreign dignitaries. The case gained international attention when the British Prime Minister's office issued a statement supporting Marcus Wellington. They emphasized that attacking diplomatic security personnel was unacceptable and could damage relationships between allied nations. This official backing gave Marcus's legal team additional credibility and resources. Rebecca Henderson filed the lawsuit in federal court, seeking $100 million in damages for defamation, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with Marcus's career prospects. The amount reflected not just personal damages, but also the broader principle that government officials must be held accountable for their actions. The filing sent shockwaves through Washington's political establishment. Vice President Vance's approval ratings began dropping as more details about his behavior emerged. Republican leaders found themselves in the awkward position of defending conduct that was clearly inappropriate while trying to maintain party unity. Democratic politicians seized on the opportunity to highlight character issues with the vice president, but they had to be careful not to appear to be exploiting a foreign national's complaint for political gain. The situation created unusual political dynamics that crossed traditional party lines. Marcus received support from unexpected sources. Veterans organizations rallied behind him, recognizing his military background and professional service record. International security associations issued statements condemning attempts to intimidate protection officers who were simply doing their jobs. The vice president's team made several strategic errors in their response. Instead of quietly settling the matter, they chose to fight publicly, which kept the story in the news cycle. Their aggressive tactics against Marcus and his family generated sympathy and made them appear to be bullying a dedicated public servant. Legal experts began analyzing the case in media interviews, with many concluding that Marcus had a strong foundation for his claims. The video evidence was particularly compelling, showing clearly that Vice President Vance had initiated physical contact without justification. As depositions began, more damaging information emerged. Staff members from the Vice President's office testified about a hostile work environment and regular outbursts directed at security personnel and subordinates. The pattern of behavior suggested that the embassy incident was not an isolated occurrence. The international diplomatic community was watching the case closely. Foreign embassies in Washington began reviewing their security protocols and expressing concerns about protecting their personnel from similar incidents. Some countries quietly indicated they might limit diplomatic interactions if American officials couldn't be trusted to behave appropriately. Marcus remained focused on seeking justice rather than revenge. He wanted to clear his name, protect his career, and ensure that other security professionals wouldn't face similar treatment. The financial compensation was secondary to establishing the principle that everyone, regardless of their political position, must be held accountable for their actions. The stage was set for a legal battle that would test the American justice system's ability to hold powerful politicians accountable. Marcus Wellington, a dedicated professional who had spent his career protecting others, was now fighting to protect the integrity of his profession and the principle that no one is above the law. The deposition of Vice President J.D. Vance took place in a secure conference room at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. Marcus Wellington sat across from the man who had changed his life forever, watching as America's second highest elected official was forced to answer questions under oath about his behavior at the British Embassy. Vance arrived with a team of 6 lawyers, each specializing in different aspects of political defense. They had prepared extensively, but the video evidence and witness testimonies created challenges that even the most expensive legal representation couldn't easily overcome. The vice president appeared nervous, frequently consulting with his attorneys before answering simple questions. Rebecca Henderson conducted the deposition with surgical precision. She began with basic questions about the embassy event, establishing the timeline and Vance's recollection of the evening. The vice president's answers were evasive, often claiming he couldn't remember specific details about interactions that multiple witnesses had described clearly. When shown the video footage of him pushing Marcus, Vance's demeanor changed noticeably. He claimed the contact was accidental and that Marcus had misinterpreted his intentions. However, the camera angle clearly showed deliberate movement and aggressive body language that contradicted his testimony. The most damaging moment came when Henderson presented recordings of Vance's verbal attacks on Marcus. The vice president had used language that was both professionally inappropriate and personally demeaning. When asked to explain his comments, Vance's lawyers objected repeatedly, but the words were preserved forever on digital recordings. Marcus watched as the vice president attempted to justify calling him incompetent, unprofessional, and questioning his foreign loyalties. These statements, made in front of distinguished guests at a diplomatic function, revealed a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. The deposition revealed additional incidents that Marcus's legal team had uncovered. Staff members from various government events had provided sworn statements about similar confrontations with Vice President Vance. a pattern emerged of a man who believed his political position gave him the right to treat security personnel as subordinates rather than professionals doing their jobs. One particularly compelling piece of evidence was testimony from a former White House aide who had witnessed Vance berating Secret Service agents during official functions. The aide described incidents where the vice president had questioned agents' competence and made inappropriate comments about their personal backgrounds. During breaks in the deposition, Marcus noticed how differently the vice president's team treated their own security personnel compared to how they interacted with the legal team. Even in this setting, there was a clear hierarchy that placed protection officers at the bottom of the respect scale. The international implications of the case became more apparent during the proceedings. British embassy officials provided testimony about the diplomatic fallout from the incident. Several planned cultural exchanges had been postponed, and there was measurable strain in U.S.-UK relations at the working level, even if official statements remained diplomatically cordial. Marcus learned that his case had inspired other security professionals to come forward with their own experiences. Letters of support arrived from protection officers around the world who had faced similar treatment from high-ranking officials. The case was becoming larger than one man's quest for justice. The vice president's attempts to discredit Marcus backfired spectacularly during cross-examination. When pressed about his claims that Marcus had fabricated the incident, Vance couldn't explain why a decorated security professional with a spotless record would suddenly decide to create an international incident for personal gain. Rebecca Henderson presented evidence of the coordinated campaign to destroy Marcus's reputation. Phone records showed contacts between the vice president's office and media outlets before negative stories about Marcus appeared. The timeline clearly indicated that damaging information was being planted to deflect attention from Vance's behavior. The deposition also revealed the personal toll the incident had taken on both families. Marcus's children had been subjected to online harassment and threats. Sarah Wellington testified about the stress of watching her husband's reputation being systematically attacked while they struggled with mounting legal expenses and uncertain career prospects. Surprisingly, some of the most powerful testimony came from Lady Catherine Morrison, the British diplomat who had been the target of Vance's initial inappropriate behavior. Her composed but firm account of the evening painted a picture of a man who believed diplomatic immunity extended to personal conduct rather than just official duties. The vice president's team made several strategic mistakes during the deposition. Their aggressive questioning of Marcus backfired when it became clear that his story remained consistent under pressure, while their client's account contained numerous contradictions and convenient memory lapses. Media coverage of the deposition proceedings was extensive, with legal analysts noting the unusual spectacle of a sitting vice president being questioned under oath about personal conduct. The political implications were significant, with some calling for Vance to resign his position pending resolution of the case. Marcus maintained his composure throughout the proceedings, answering questions directly and honestly. His military bearing and professional demeanor contrasted sharply with the vice president's evasive responses and frequent consultations with lawyers. The difference was noticed by everyone in the room, including court reporters and security personnel. The deposition concluded with Henderson presenting a timeline of events that was supported by multiple forms of evidence. Video recordings, witness statements, phone records, and documentary evidence created a compelling narrative that would be difficult for any jury to ignore. As they left the courthouse, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and vindication. The legal process was far from over, but the deposition had established facts that would be crucial to his case. The Vice President of the United States had been forced to answer for his actions under oath, and the results were not favorable to his defense. The case was generating international attention and raising important questions about accountability for government officials. Marcus Wellington, who had spent his career protecting others, was now leading a fight that could protect security professionals everywhere from similar treatment by those they serve. The trial of Wellington versus Vance opened on a crisp Monday morning in the federal courthouse, with media trucks lined up for blocks and international correspondents broadcasting live from the courthouse steps. Marcus Wellington walked through, the crowd of reporters with quiet dignity, his military posture unchanged despite months of legal battles and public scrutiny. Judge Patricia Martinez had been assigned to the case, bringing 30 years of federal court experience and a reputation for fairness in high-profile political cases. She made it clear from the opening statements that celebrity status would not influence her courtroom and that all parties would be held to the same standards of evidence and procedure. The prosecution's opening statement painted a clear picture of abuse of power. Rebecca Henderson stood before the jury and described how a dedicated public servant had been assaulted, defamed, and subjected to a coordinated campaign of character assassination simply for doing his job. She promised to prove that Vice President Vance had crossed lines that no government official should cross. The defense team, led by prominent Washington attorney Charles Morrison, attempted to portray the incident as a cultural misunderstanding between American and British security protocols. They suggested that Marcus had overreacted to normal diplomatic interactions and was seeking financial gain by exploiting political tensions. The first week of testimony featured witnesses who had attended the embassy reception. Lady Catherine. Morrison's testimony was particularly compelling as she described Vice President Vance's inappropriate behavior and how Marcus had professionally attempted to defuse the situation. Her aristocratic composure and detailed recollection impressed the jury visibly. British Ambassador Sir Edmund Hartwell provided context about diplomatic security arrangements and confirmed that Marcus had followed all established protocols throughout the evening. His testimony established that the security arrangements had been coordinated weeks in advance and that all American officials, including the Vice President, had been briefed on the procedures. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the courtroom viewed the complete security footage from multiple camera angles. The video clearly showed Vice President Vance's aggressive approach to Marcus, the physical contact that constituted assault, and the subsequent verbal confrontation. Several jurors visibly reacted to the Vice President's behavior on screen. Audio. Recordings played in the courtroom captured Vance's exact words during the confrontation. The language was not only professionally inappropriate, but revealed a pattern of thinking that suggested he viewed security personnel as subordinates rather than professionals deserving of respect. The recordings were particularly damaging because they couldn't be explained away as misunderstandings. Marcus took the stand on the trial's 8th day, spending 3 days under direct examination and cross-examination. His testimony was methodical and professional, walking the jury through his 15-year career, his training in diplomatic security, and the specific events of that evening at the embassy. Under cross-examination, the defense team attempted to portray Marcus as ambitious and publicity-seeking. However, their strategy backfired when they couldn't explain why a man with his exemplary record would suddenly decide to fabricate an incident that would damage his own career prospects and subject his family to international scrutiny. The prosecution presented evidence of the systematic campaign to destroy Marcus's reputation. Phone records, email communications, and witness testimony revealed how negative stories about Marcus were planted in media outlets within hours of the incident. The coordination between the Vice President's office and friendly journalists was documented in detail. Expert witnesses testified about the long-term career damage that Marcus had suffered. Security industry professionals explained how false accusations of unprofessional conduct could end a protection officer's career permanently. The testimony established that Marcus's earning potential had been severely compromised by the coordinated attacks on his reputation. Medical testimony revealed the psychological impact on Marcus and his family. Doctors described symptoms of stress and anxiety that developed after the incident, not from the physical confrontation itself, but from the months-long campaign to discredit him. Sarah Wellington's testimony about their children's experiences at school brought several jurors to tears. The defense called character witnesses for Vice President Vance, including political colleagues and staff members. However, their testimony was undermined during cross-examination when many admitted they had never worked with him in high-stress security situations or witnessed his interactions with protection personnel. A crucial turning point came when a former Secret Service agent testified about similar incidents involving Vice President Vance. The agent, now retired and free to speak honestly, described multiple occasions when Vance had been inappropriate with security personnel, including incidents that had been quietly handled through internal channels. The prosecution's final witness was Dr. Elizabeth Crawford, an expert in workplace harassment and power dynamics. She explained how government officials could create hostile environments for security personnel who were professionally obligated to remain respectful despite inappropriate treatment. Her testimony provided context for understanding the broader implications of the case. During closing arguments, Rebecca Henderson emphasized that the case was about more than money or personal vindication. She argued that it was about establishing the principle that no government official, regardless of their position, could assault and defame dedicated public servants without consequences. The defense's closing argument focused on the high burden of proof required in civil cases and suggested that Marcus's motivations were financially driven. However, their argument was weakened by the overwhelming evidence of Vice President Vance's inappropriate behavior and the documented efforts to destroy Marcus's career. Judge Martinez's jury instructions emphasized that political considerations should play no role in their deliberations. She explained the legal standards for assault, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, making it clear that the Vice President's office provided no immunity for personal misconduct. As the jury began deliberations, Marcus felt a sense of completion, regardless of the outcome. The truth about what had happened at the British Embassy was now part of the public record. The evidence had been presented fairly, and the American justice system was being tested in its ability to hold powerful officials accountable. The international media coverage had already achieved one of Marcus's goals. Security professionals around the world were now aware that someone was willing to stand up to inappropriate treatment by government officials. Professional organizations had rallied behind principles of respect and dignity for protection personnel. The jury's decision would determine not only Marcus Wellington's financial future, but also send a message about accountability for those in power. The case had become a symbol of the struggle between institutional authority and individual rights, played out on an international stage with consequences far beyond one man's quest for justice. The jury deliberated for 4 tense days while the world watched and waited. Marcus Wellington spent those days trying to maintain normal routines with his family, though the constant media attention outside their hotel made privacy nearly impossible. International news networks provided hourly updates on the deliberations, with legal experts analyzing every possible outcome. On Thursday morning, the jury sent word that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly with journalists, legal observers, and supporters from both sides. Marcus sat with Rebecca Henderson and her legal team, maintaining the same composed demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial, though his hands betrayed slight nervousness. Vice President Vance entered the courtroom surrounded by his legal team and security detail. The political implications of the verdict were enormous, with some analysts suggesting that a guilty verdict could impact his ability to remain in office effectively. His wife and senior staff members filled the seats behind the defense table. Judge Martinez called the court to order and asked the jury foreman to stand. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone waited for the verdict that would determine not only Marcus's future, but also set a precedent for accountability among America's highest officials. The jury found Vice President J.D. Vance liable on all counts. They determined that he had indeed assaulted Marcus Wellington, defamed his character through false statements, and caused intentional emotional distress through his actions and the subsequent campaign to destroy Marcus's reputation. The verdict was unanimous, indicating that the evidence had been overwhelming. The damages award stunned everyone present. The jury awarded Marcus Wellington $75 million in compensatory and punitive damages, just $25 million, less than his legal team had requested. The amount reflected not only the career damage Marcus had suffered, but also served as a strong message about the seriousness of the vice president's misconduct. The courtroom erupted in reaction to the verdict. Marcus remained seated, overwhelmed by the validation of his decision to fight, rather than accept being made a scapegoat. Sarah Wellington wept quietly beside him, finally seeing justice for the months of harassment and stress their family had endured. Vice President Vance appeared shocked by the verdict and the size of the award. His legal team immediately announced plans to appeal, claiming that the jury had been influenced by anti-government sentiment and international pressure. However, legal experts noted that the evidence had been so compelling that an appeal was unlikely to succeed. The political reactions were swift and decisive. Republican leaders who had supported Vance throughout the trial found themselves in an impossible position. Several prominent senators called for his resignation, arguing that he could no longer effectively represent American interests internationally after being found liable for assaulting a foreign diplomat's security officer. Democratic leaders were more direct in their criticism, with some calling for impeachment proceedings based on the jury's findings. The Speaker of the House announced that the House would review the verdict's implications for Vance's continued service as vice president, suggesting that formal action might be necessary. International reactions were equally significant. The British government issued a statement praising the American justice system for holding government officials accountable, while several allied nations expressed concerns about diplomatic security arrangements involving American officials. Some countries quietly began reviewing their protocols for high-level visits. Marcus Wellington's victory had implications far beyond his personal case. Security professional organizations around the world hailed the verdict as a landmark decision that established important precedents for protecting those who dedicate their careers to others' safety. The message was clear. Inappropriate treatment by government officials would have consequences. The financial award would certainly change Marcus's life, but he had consistently stated that vindication was more important than compensation. The jury's unanimous verdict provided complete validation of his version of events and his decision to seek legal remedy rather than accept character assassination quietly. The trial's outcome also revealed the effectiveness of the American legal system in addressing abuse of power. Despite Vice President Vance's political position and expensive legal representation, the evidence and testimony had been evaluated fairly, demonstrating that no one was above the law when clear violations occurred. Media coverage of the verdict was extensive, with international outlets praising the transparency of the American judicial process. The case had been conducted in full public view, with evidence presented openly and testimony given under oath. The result reinforced America's reputation for judicial independence, even when politically sensitive cases were involved. The verdict's impact on Vice President Vance's political future became apparent quickly. Polling data showed significant drops in his approval ratings, and several potential presidential campaigns began distancing themselves from him. The liability finding made him a political liability for any candidate or cause he might support. For Marcus Wellington, the verdict represented more than legal victory. It validated 15 years of dedicated service and proved that his commitment to professional standards had been correct. The jury had recognized the importance of maintaining dignity and respect in all professional interactions, regardless of political positions or power dynamics. The case also highlighted the importance of documentation and witness testimony in establishing truth. The video evidence, audio recordings, and consistent witness statements had created an unassailable foundation for Marcus's claims. The lesson for other security professionals was clear: inappropriate behavior should be documented and reported through proper channels. Sarah Wellington spoke to reporters outside the courthouse, expressing gratitude for the support their family had received from around the world. She emphasized that the victory belonged not just to Marcus, but to all security professionals who face inappropriate treatment while doing their jobs with dedication and professionalism. The legal precedent established by Wellington versus Vance would influence future cases involving government officials and their treatment of public servants. The Substantial Damages Award sent a clear message that character assassination and abuse of power carry significant consequences, even for those in the highest positions of authority. Marcus Wellington had achieved his primary objectives through the legal process. His reputation was restored, his professional competence was validated, and important principles about accountability and respect were established. The victory would resonate throughout the security profession and beyond, demonstrating that justice could prevail even against seemingly overwhelming political power. 3 months after the landmark verdict, Marcus Wellington stood in his new office overlooking the Thames River in London. The Wellington security consulting firm had become one of the most respected names in diplomatic protection services, with clients seeking both his expertise and the credibility that came with his successful stand against abuse of power. The $75 million award had been life-changing, but Marcus had used the majority of the funds to establish a foundation, supporting security professionals who faced retaliation for reporting inappropriate behavior. The Marcus Wellington Foundation provided legal support, career counseling, and financial assistance to protection officers worldwide who found themselves in similar situations. Vice President J.D. Vance's political career had effectively ended with the verdict. Despite appeals and attempts to minimize the impact, the liability finding had made him radioactive within political circles. President Trump had quietly encouraged his resignation, and Vance had announced his intention not to seek re-election, citing a desire to focus on his family and private legal practice. The ripple effects of the case continued to influence American politics and international relations. New protocols were established for diplomatic events, with clear guidelines about appropriate behavior toward security personnel. Training programs were implemented for government officials on proper interactions with protection officers from allied nations. Marcus had received numerous job offers from security firms, private companies, and even government agencies seeking to capitalize on his reputation for integrity and professionalism. However, he had chosen to build his own company, allowing him to maintain the standards and principles that had guided him throughout his career. The British government had recognized Marcus with a special commendation for his service to international diplomatic relations. The award ceremony at Buckingham Palace was attended by many of the same officials who had supported him during the legal battle. The recognition validated his decision to stand firm on professional principles despite enormous pressure to remain silent. Sarah Wellington had also found new purpose following their legal victory. She had written a book about their family's experience, with proceeds donated to organizations supporting the families of security professionals. Her account of the personal toll of fighting powerful interests had resonated with readers worldwide, becoming an international bestseller. The couple's children had recovered well from their difficult period, with the family's vindication helping them understand why their father had chosen such a difficult path. They had learned valuable lessons about standing up for principles even when the personal cost seemed overwhelming. International security conferences now regularly featured discussions about the Wellington case and its implications for the profession. Marcus had become a sought-after speaker, sharing his experience and advocating for stronger protections for security personnel. His presentations always emphasized that the case had been about principle rather than personal gain. The legal precedent established by the case had already influenced several similar situations. Government officials around the world were more careful about their treatment of security personnel, understanding that inappropriate behavior could have serious legal and professional consequences. The message had been received clearly across the international diplomatic community. Vice President Vance's attempts to rehabilitate his image had largely failed. His autobiography, released 6 months after the verdict, had poor sales and was criticized for failing to acknowledge responsibility for his actions. The book tour was cut short after protests at several venues, and he had largely withdrawn from public appearances. The case had also influenced legislative discussions about accountability for government officials. Several countries had strengthened their codes of conduct for diplomatic personnel, with specific provisions addressing treatment of security staff. The Wellington case was frequently cited in parliamentary debates about official behavior standards. Marcus had established scholarship programs for young people interested in security careers, particularly those from backgrounds similar to his own. The programs emphasized both technical skills and ethical standards, ensuring that the next generation of protection officers would be prepared to maintain professional dignity regardless of circumstances. The success of Wellington Security Consulting demonstrated the lasting value of integrity in professional relationships. Clients sought Marcus not just for his expertise, but for the assurance that their security arrangements would be handled with the highest ethical standards. His reputation had become his most valuable business asset. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond legal support to include research on improving working conditions for security professionals. Reports published by the Foundation had influenced policy changes in several countries and had been cited by international labor organizations focused on protection officer rights. Marcus often reflected on the journey from that difficult evening at the British Embassy to his current position as a respected advocate for his profession. The decision to fight rather than accept unfair treatment had been vindicated completely, both personally and professionally. The case had demonstrated that truth and evidence could prevail even against seemingly overwhelming odds. The long-term impact of Wellington versus Vance extended far beyond one man's quest for justice. It had established important legal precedents, influenced international diplomatic protocols, and sent a clear message about accountability for government officials. Most importantly, it had shown security professionals worldwide that their dignity and professional standards were worth defending. Sarah often remarked that their family's difficult period had ultimately led to positive changes that would benefit others for years to come. The harassment and stress they had endured had been worthwhile because it had resulted in better protections and greater respect for security professionals everywhere. As Marcus looked out at the London skyline from his office window, he felt satisfaction not just from his business success, but from the knowledge that his stand had made a difference. The Wellington case would be studied in law schools and cited in future legal battles, ensuring that its lessons would continue to protect others who found themselves facing similar challenges. The story of Royal Guard Marcus Wellington's successful lawsuit against Vice President J.D. Vance had become more than a legal victory. It had evolved into a symbol of the importance of standing up for professional principles and personal integrity, regardless of the power and influence of those who would abuse their positions. The $75 million verdict was significant, but the lasting impact on accountability and respect in professional relationships was the true legacy of his courageous decision to seek justice.